The nearly 3-hour talks have been described as productive by both leaders. President Donald Trump has said the two sides had made some headway, but added that there's no deal so far. Meanwhile, Putin has said that he is sincerely interested in putting an end to the conflict, but did not give further details. Following the summit, Trump told Fox News he would hold off on imposing tariffs on China over Russian oil purchases, but confirmed India will face a new 25% tariff on imports into the United States. Let's take a listen in to what the leaders have said at the conference.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway.
Очевидно, что рано или поздно нужно было выправлять ситуацию, переходить от конфронтации к диалогу. И в этом плане личная встреча глав двух государств реально назрела, конечно, с условием серьезной и кропотливой подготовки. И такая работа в целом была проделана. У нас с президентом Трампом установились очень хорошие. Хочется надеяться, что достигнутое нами понимание позволит приблизиться к той цели и откроет дорогу к миру на Украине. Мы рассчитываем, что в Киеве и европейских столицах воспримут все это в конструктивном ключе и не станут чинить никаких препятствий. Не будут предпринимать попыток за счет провокаций или закулисных интриг сорвать намечающийся прогресс. Наши переговоры прошли в конструктивной и взаимоуважительной атмосфере. Были весьма обстоятельными и полезными.
So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe. Thank you very much.
Now we just heard from the two presidents there, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. We heard some statements there, mainly positive statements coming out of Alaska last night. However, there has been no deal reached, no pause in fighting. Many critics are criticizing Donald Trump and saying that Putin got exactly what he wanted. We are now joined by Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thank you very much, as always, for joining us here on the program. Your thoughts on the Alaska summit? It started with a grand meeting between the two presidents on a red carpet and ended with no pause in fighting, no ceasefire deal, much to Trump's wars prior to this summit. Can I get your analysis on the outcome of these much anticipated talks?
Certainly, it's a disappointment that there's no progress on even something such as an interim ceasefire. So putting aside whether there could be parameters for a medium to a long-term ceasefire agreement, one of the things that the Trump administration has sought repeatedly over the past 6 months that it's been in office is an interim, a brief ceasefire, a pause in fighting that could be 30 days or 60 days, for example. So clearly they didn't even achieve that minimal goal. On the other hand, there is another way to look at this. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is I think we're already seeing, especially on American television or in some of the American media, a lot of criticism of President Trump, not only because it doesn't look like there was much substantive outcome as far as we know yet, but simply because he had the meeting. So another way to look at this is that President Trump is trying to bring about a ceasefire or even a long-term agreement, and the only way you could do that is to engage the parties, however distasteful that might be to some people. And ultimately, President Trump has made the decision that he's going to engage with Putin. For better or for worse, that's his policy. His special envoy, Witkoff, has met multiple times with Putin. Now President Trump has met with Putin. President Putin invited President Trump to come to Moscow for another meeting. We don't know if that will actually occur. But it's clear that in the interest of ending this war, President Trump is investing his own, as we say in America, political capital in trying to reach that goal. So he does deserve some credit for that.
Ross, we've seen a freezing out of Russia from Western countries since that year of 2022 when they first invaded Ukraine in February. Do you think that this is a reintroduction of Moscow into the global Western community?
Really unlikely, and even if that's to occur, it's going to be at a very small pace, or slow pace, I should say. Clearly, at least up to the moment, the European countries, with very few exceptions, are united in their support for Ukraine, whether that's providing cash to the Ukraine government or providing weapons to the Ukrainian military. And most recently, the European countries committed to buy more American weapons that they're going to then give to Ukraine. And also the European countries were very concerned about this meeting, and they were concerned about President Zelensky not being a participant. And there's also those significant European Union sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. And there's no talk at the moment of anything in the direction of removing those sanctions. Even if the United States were to remove some of its sanctions on Russia companies or Russian oligarchs, there's no talk at the moment of Europe willing to do that. So any reintegration of Russia into Europe, I think that's just not on the table at the moment, and it's going to be a long time until that happens.
And Ross, can I get your thoughts on the way that Putin and Trump interacted with each other? We saw a handshake and smiles when they first greeted. And during their quote-unquote press conference in which there were no questions, there was even joking between the two, with Vladimir Putin saying in English that they should have their next meet in Moscow. Your thoughts on the interaction between both of the leaders, especially in contrast to that of that infamous Zelensky meeting that we have seen previously back in February of this year?
Of course, critics and cynics are going to say that President Trump was too friendly to a dictator or too friendly to someone who invaded his neighbor. So I would expect that there's going to be that kind of criticism of President Trump. On the other hand, yes, you cited the example of the Zelensky meeting, which got out of hand. But generally, when President Trump is meeting foreign leaders or even people that he's criticized in the past, when he meets them one-on-one in person, President Trump tends to be quite friendly and put on his best personality. We've seen that with domestic political opponents. For example, one of his significant political enemies is Governor Newsom of California, but when they met in person after wildfires in California, President Trump had a friendly conversation with Governor Newsom. We saw that at former President Carter's funeral when Trump sat next to Obama, and they certainly have a negative history between the two of them. Even when Trump met Prime Minister Carney of Canada after all the back and forth on social media, he was very friendly in person. So I think that tends to be President Trump's habit. And President Trump would probably tell us that that's just part of his negotiating style. And, he likes to say he's the best negotiator. So part of his negotiating tactics is just to be friendly to people in meetings.
Ross Feingold, pleasure having you with us as always. We're now joined by two further guests. Scott Faulkner, who's the head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm located in Washington, D.C. And we're also joined by John Rossomando, who's the president of Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst. He joins us live from Washington as well. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us here on the program. Your insight on this conference, your analysis of it all. Donald Trump went into this meeting in Alaska, with firm words for the Russian president saying that he will not be messed about. However, Vladimir Putin gets to continue his war with no ceasefire announced, not even a pause. Critics are saying this is a win for Vladimir Putin with his reintroduction to the Western stage with a direct meeting with the United States President. Scott, your thoughts on the outcome of this high-profile summit?
Well, definitely it's a win for Vladimir Putin. I mean, he is now back on the world stage. This is the first time he's been in America outside of the United Nations in over 2 decades. He's basically on the same level ground as the most powerful man in the world, which is Trump. So it's a big win for him. Now the key is in all this is that Trump is being very close, holding his cards close to the vest on what was really talked about, and we're going to be able to see in the next literally days, if not weeks, whether something else is going to come out of this, whether we're going to be looking at more talks or we're going to be looking at more sanctions. I think everyone's trying to look at body language, facial expressions, what Trump said, reading between the lines, and he had a very friendly interview with Fox News right after the summit, and hinted that there was some land swaps discussed, but he was very close-lipped on everything else. So I think that right now it's all speculation, but something will play out in the next couple of weeks that either says this was a successful meeting for the West, not just for Putin. We'll see.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Stay with us. John, your thoughts on the meeting between the Russian and the US president, and also how are people in the United States reacting to Donald Trump hosting Vladimir Putin in the United States and coming to no agreement on a war that he said he would end in 24 hours before he became president?
Well, honestly, I didn't have much, hope for anything coming out of this. This looks like it's kind of maybe like the 1986 Reagan Gorbachev summit in Reykjavik that the media said nothing came out of, but there's a long road to hoe in order to maybe have some kind of agreement. I think that Putin definitely is back on the global stage in terms of the West because of President Trump's openness to him. However, I also think that the way that we deal with these things should be through personal diplomacy. I mean, we had the meetings with Gorbachev while Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, was in the 6th or 7th year of its invasion of Afghanistan. And I think that this is just the beginning.
Yes. Scott, I wanted to come back to you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who was not present at this summit, is yet to publicly comment on the outcome. There were many worries by Ukraine and her allies that there was a fear that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin would agree to territorial concessions without Ukraine at the table. This, of course, hasn't happened. And how do you think Zelensky and the rest of Ukraine, of course, is looking upon the outcome of this summit?
Well, I think that's, again, to be played out. I'm sure that even while Trump is flying back to Washington, D.C., he's probably on the phone with Zelensky or some other people relating to Ukraine, probably with European leaders, to say this is what we talked about, this is what's still on the table, this is what might move us forward or not move us forward. So I think that there's probably a lot of secure conversations going on right now, even I said while Trump is flying back home, to lay out the groundwork for what really happened in that 3-hour session. And so we probably won't know a lot of this until, again, several more days, if not weeks, to play out.
Yes, and John, back to you. What are your thoughts with the body language, with the language coming out of this meeting, mainly positive, Also a rapport that we knew that was there previously between the two presidents, and now a seeming closeness, some jokes exchanged between the two. Your thoughts on the actions between the both figureheads of these two incredibly powerful countries?
Well, it's a lot about rapport building. I mean, diplomacy, deal making requires rapport. You need to have respect between the two people at the negotiating table to get anything accomplished. I mean, this is not what a lot of people wanted. I mean, most people would like for Russia just to leave Ukraine, but that's not going to happen. Putin's pretty much made that decision. So I think that the hard work needs to be done between Mr. Witkoff, Mr. Lavrov, and the Ukrainian government.
Yes. Thank you very much, John. Scott and John, do stay with us. Before we move on, let's now cut across to that press conference held by the Russian president and the United States President Donald Trump in Alaska. Let's go and take a glance.
President of the United States of America and the President of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, our negotiations have been held in a constructive atmosphere of mutual respect. We have very thorough negotiations that were quite useful. I would like to thank once again my American counterpart for the proposal to travel out here to Alaska. It only makes sense that we've met here because our countries, though separated by the oceans, are close neighbors. So when we've met, when I came out of the plane and I've said, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive." I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. There was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots are buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation. However strange it may sound in these conditions, we have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve.
There we have it, a press conference but with no questions. We are once again joined by Scott Faulkner and John Rosso-Mando to discuss what we've just heard in a bit more detail. Scott, first of all, I want to come to you. There's a talk there of a real warm in US-Russia relations. We've obviously seen a divided opinion when it comes to Donald Trump's approach to the Russians and Vladimir Putin. How do you think the Americans are going to receive a possible warming of relations towards Moscow? And it goes with saying that opposition has come from not just from the Democrats, but also from within the Republican Party as well. Your thoughts on the newly warm rhetoric between the two presidents?
Well, we all know that rhetoric and reality are two different things. What Vladimir Putin said was very warm, very conciliatory, very friendship and cooperative sounding, and that's great. I mean, he's playing to a world audience, and he's trying to come off like the good guy, and he kind of alludes that only the European leaders and the Ukrainian leaders could basically disrupt this new warm relationships, and so he's trying to lay down the marker that whatever he and Trump talked about behind the scenes, that no one should really mess with it. And so there was a little bit of showing of teeth there at the end, even though everything else was wrapped up in some warm fuzzies, so to speak. But again, it's all about reality. Within hours of the summit, more attacks were made in the Donbass region against Ukrainian civilians. When we look at where Putin really wants to go, he'd love to have Ukraine be a puppet state. He'd love to have regime change in the Ukraine. He's also made moves over the last couple of years to try to bring intimidation against the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. When he wakes up in the morning, he looks at the old Soviet Union map, and he'd like to have that be his map. I mean, again, until he gives up his broader goal of reestablishing the Soviet Union, we're going to have problems, no matter how warm the relationships might be personally and how warm, fuzzy the rhetoric is.
Yes, Scott. John, Trump has been pushing for a ceasefire. However, Putin didn't give it to him. What are your thoughts on the way that those two were exchanging communication just then? Lack of criticism and questions from the press as well. Of course, they would be eager to ask questions. That privilege wasn't granted by the two presidents. Your thoughts on the warm interactions between Donald Trump and President Putin? It seems that those Truth Social posts in all capitals that we've been seeing so frequently damning the Russian president by Donald Trump have not come to fruition, and he has not pushed them upon in person. John, your thoughts on what we've just heard from Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump there?
Well, it's just like classic negotiating tactics. I mean, President Trump always likes to, use intimidation, sound bigger than the person he's dealing with across the table in his, social media rhetoric. But when it comes down to it, it's about building rapport, building trust, and hopefully getting Vladimir Putin to see some kind of reason to end this war. So far, it's just the beginning. I'm hopeful that maybe a year from now we'll be looking at something different. But I see that it's just a lot of rapport building.
Yes, Scott, I wanted to come back to you. We saw quite a friendly Fox News interview with Donald Trump directly after the press conference held with Putin. He says that one big thing blocked the deal from getting done. Of course, we can't speculate here. However, do you think that Donald Trump was possibly sticking up for Ukraine? He also, then on the interview, went to go and blame former President Joe Biden for not preventing Russia's invasion. Your thoughts on these statements?
Well, I think that pretty much everybody recognizes that under Biden, the bungled retreat from Afghanistan emboldened Putin to test the limits of what America was going to do. So the weakness and incompetence of the Biden era, and especially in the wake of the Afghanistan debacle, emboldened Putin. I think there's very few people out there who I think would take issue with that. So when people say that had Trump been in office, number one, the retreat from Afghanistan would have been handled very differently. But the other part is that everyone says that if Trump had his second term, Putin probably would not have messed with Ukraine. I mean, when you look at the history, Crimea was taken under Obama, and then Ukraine was invaded under Biden. But during the 4 years of the first Trump presidency, not much really happened in that region. I think that people saw that America was willing to stand up against aggression. And so I think that that's a very realistic and historically accurate rendering of what really has been playing out there.
John, let's stay on this press conference. A lack of questions was very prominent. Senior officials were along in the room while the two presidents were making those statements, including Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Senator of State Marco Rubio. Your thoughts on the possible lack of transparency from both administrations? We have to, of course, mention that Donald Trump did give that interview following that press conference. However, in the moment and present with both leaders, there were no questions taken from any press. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that this is some very sensitive negotiations, and there doesn't need to be transparency with the press about what's being said, because when you're dealing with the Russians, you need to have trust. You need to have them be able to realize that you're real, you have something that you can put on the table. So I think that this is just the beginning, it's not the end, and that people need to look back to past summits with past American and Russian leaders.
John, what do you think Trump got from this summit? He's phrased it very positively, but what positives came out of this summit, would you say?
Well, I think that what came out of it is building up the personal connection between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, because you need trust. Vladimir Putin had no respect for Joe Biden. That's part of why he went and invaded Ukraine. I mean, Joe Biden told Vladimir Putin that the U.S. might not do anything. It's a small incursion into Ukraine, and he looked weak. I mean, people talk about the comparisons with the Munich summit. Well, some of the interactions you had between Putin and Biden in maybe November, December of 2021 or were some of the things that led to this war. So, but I don't think that Donald Trump, would have faced this, because Vladimir Putin knows Trump and knows that he wouldn't let him have any leeway.
Yes, Scott, the same question to you. What did Trump get from this? According to a former NATO ambassador to the United States, zero. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that, again, we can only speculate what was said behind closed doors, but you figure that Trump probably mentioned very explicitly what the sticks might be in addition to what the carrots might be. And so if things play out in a positive way, meaning that there's a actual three-way discussion and that there is some form of standing down of the fighting, then that's one. Again, that's where the carrots come in. But if Putin continues to launch attacks against civilians, if basically it just looks like Putin's trying to play for time as he tries to reposition his forces and bring in additional resources, then Trump has already put, maybe behind the scenes, put on the table, if you continue to do X and Y, we're going to do, A, B, C, D, and Z. And so I think that that's probably, he wanted to say that face to Putin, and if that's the case, then it was a useful thing. One of the other parts when we talk about the show of strength, the flyover of the B-2 and the 4 fighter planes, just as they're shaking hands on the runway, I think was a nice piece of symbolism that again shows to Putin and the world that America's back.
Yes, indeed. But yet, fighting still continues in the region with no major announcement following this press conference. John, I want to get your thoughts on how European allies of Kiev will be reacting. We've said previously that there was much fear that a possible meeting could lead to Ukraine conceding land. What do you think of? What are your thoughts on how Ukraine and their European allies might be feeling following this summit?
Well, I think that the Europeans and the Ukrainians probably are feeling very uneasy. Seeing the United States and the Russians coming together. We know that the Europeans are very much fearful that Vladimir Putin will invade the Baltic states, that you'll see other provocations, and they don't want to be talking with the Russians. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with high-stakes diplomacy like this, you have to have some sort of open channel. Throughout the over 40 years of the Cold War, we had open channels between the President of the United States and the Soviet leader. I mean, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example. So I think that the end game is not what they're going to look for. The Russians aren't leaving Ukraine. They're not pulling their troops out because the Europeans and the Ukrainians don't have the ability to throw them out militarily. So they have to make a peace deal.
Scott Faulkner and John Rossomando, thank you very much for joining us in that discussion as we looked back on Trump and Putin's meet in Alaska. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you very much.